Hello, my name is Matthew Clark and I teach philosophy at Coastal Carolina University. Today I'll be commenting on Aaron Siegel's essay entitled Dynamic Nominalism, Ethics, and Subjectivity. Before I get started, I'd like to thank the Jackson Center for Ethics and Values and David Killoran for organizing the first annual online undergraduate ethics conference. I'd also like to thank Aaron for submitting such a thought-provoking essay. I've always appreciated philosophical projects that try to synthesize material that might otherwise be left apart. In his essay, Aaron attempts to give an account of subjectivation that renders Foucauldian ethics compatible with Ian Hacking's dynamic nominalism. Following this synthesis, Aaron makes the claim that both Foucault and Hacking give an account of subjectivation that is mainly deterministic in nature. Aaron thinks that, given his account of the two theories, individual freedom is in most cases far less important for subjectivation than socially determined categories and spaces of possibility. My commentary will address two main questions. Firstly, is Foucault's problematization of the subject compatible with Ian Hacking's dynamic nominalism? And secondly, what role does freedom play in Foucault's account of the subject and power? This second question addresses the relation between freedom and ethics for Foucault. I will end my commentary with a few hopefully helpful questions about an issue that Aaron discusses toward the end of his essay, and I'll provide a brief bibliography that might aid in the further development of Aaron's project. It's also important for me to say that my commentary contrasts my reading of Foucault with Aaron's reading. Any reference to Ian Hacking's position refers to Aaron's representation of Hacking's position. Before I address the question of whether or not Foucault's problematization of a subject is compatible with dynamic nominalism, let me say that I have always been skeptical of certain isms and ists used in contemporary philosophical discussions, especially those that take place in English. I worry that every ism is a strategy hidden behind a truth, and insofar as the ism isn't what it says it is a lie. The ism at play in our discussion today is determinism. For at least 3 centuries, philosophers have opposed the notion of determinism and that of the freedom of the will. This opposition is a strategic mistake. Freedom is a power of the intellect and is never properly associated with the will. Any association of freedom with the will is a strategy meant to deprive the intellect of its most powerful ability. And this intended deprivation should be considered a serious problem in philosophy. In short, and in order to allow you to wonder about what I mean, wonder is the first problem in modern philosophy, let me say that the opposition of the freedom of the will and determinism in the history of philosophy, especially as it appears in English, has been the slow and deliberate ontological suffocation of ethics. Now, let us turn to Foucault and the question of whether or not his problematization of the subject is compatible with Hacking's dynamic nominalism. In his essay, Aaron points out that according to Hacking, the categories we employ in classifying people are determined by 2 vectors, a vector from above and a vector from below. The vector from above is constituted by a community of experts who classify others. The vector from below is constituted by those who are classified. According to Aaron, dynamic nominalism states that reality changes as do the categories or spaces of possibility that individuals can occupy. The determinism of dynamic nominalism is limited by the role the individual plays in the occupation of available categories or spaces of possibility. Now, if it is the vector from above that determines the categories available to those who constitute the vector from below, ethical resistance, or the actualization of the power of freedom, would consist in the radical effacement of the vector from above by those who constitute the vector from below. In order to make the claim that dynamic nominalism is compatible with Foucault's problematization of the subject, we would have to find something in Foucault's discussion of subjectivity that resembles Hacking's model of subjectivation. I am not aware of any such resemblance. While Foucault does talk about power in relation to the subject, he does not speak about power as if it exists above society, as a kind of determining force or vector. Instead, Foucault speaks of a permanent relationship or agonism that exists between power and freedom's ability to resist. Once again, power relations for Foucault do not consist in the domination or determination of a society by experts. Rather, power relations represent a permanent provocation, agonism, or struggle that is dispersed throughout all social existence. Power relates us. It is the way in which I act upon your actions, and vice versa. And it manifests itself in certain historical crystallizations which can be analyzed, questioned, or problematized. In the essay The Subject and Power, published as an afterword to Dreyfus and Rabanel's Michel Foucault Beyond Structuralism and Hermeneutics, Foucault remarks that power relations are rooted deep in the social nexus, not reconstituted above society, as a supplementary structure whose radical effacement one could perhaps dream of. In any case, to live in society is to live in such a way that action upon other actions is possible and, in fact, ongoing. For to say that there cannot be a society without power relations is not to say either that those which are established are necessary, or in any case that power constitutes a fatality at the heart of societies, such that it cannot be undermined. Instead, I would say that the analysis, elaboration, and bringing into question of power relations and the agonism between power relations and the intransitivity of freedom is a permanent political task inherent in all social existence. I interpret this explanation of power relations as an explicit rejection of Hacking's description of subjectivation and categorization as an interaction between a vector from above and one from below. From Foucault's perspective, there is not a vector from above and a vector from below. There is an ongoing process, a permanent provocation, agonism, or struggle that makes its appearance as the possibility of action upon others' actions within society. Now, on to the next question. What role does freedom play in Foucault's account of the subject and power? This is also the question of the relation in Foucault between freedom and ethics. In the interview from Paul Rabanel's edited volume, Ethics, Subjectivity and Truth, that Aaron uses for his essay, Foucault claims that freedom is the ontological condition of ethics, but ethics is the considered form that freedom takes when it's informed by reflection. This is to say that there is a necessary and permanent connection between the power of freedom and ethics, which is the form that freedom takes when it expresses itself as the power of the intellect to reflect, question, problematize, and analyze. Put another way, there is no ethics without freedom, and freedom cannot exist in a vacuum, apart from its expression. It seems clear that Foucault places a heavy emphasis on the role of the power of freedom in ethics, which is the relation of a self to itself through reflection. If we return to the Subject and Power essay mentioned before, we find that Foucault once again emphasizes the necessity of freedom as a condition for the possibility of the exercise of power, which is a mode of action upon the actions of others. Foucault remarks that power is exercised only over free subjects, and only insofar as they are free. By this we mean individual or collective subjects who are faced with a field of possibilities in which several ways of behaving, several reactions, and diverse comportments may be realized. Where the determining factors saturate the whole, there is no relationship of power. Slavery is not a power relationship when man is in chains. This would be a physical relationship. The relationship between power and freedom's refusal to submit cannot, therefore, be separated. In his essay, Aaron claims that predetermined categories and spaces of possibility are, then, far more influential on an individual's subjectivation than his own freedom in actualizing those possibilities. This would only be the case if power relations were stable and inert. Foucault points out that power relations are always unstable and mobile. Also, freedom for Foucault is much different than an individual's ability to step into ready-made categories, which might be compatible with the desire many of us have, following the Enlightenment, to discover the truth of our subjectivity. Freedom, from Foucault's perspective, is not found in our desire to discover the truth of our being. It is found in the ability of the intellect to reflect upon how we might become different. The possibilities for that becoming are not discovered, they are produced. The last thing I would like to do is ask a few questions about an issue Aaron discusses at the end of his essay, and a few general questions that I think could be helpful. The final issue Aaron addresses is whether the influence on subjectivation of the deterministic categories and spaces of possibility has changed through history. I thought this was an interesting question that might be expanded upon in a future project. But the question that came to my mind as I read this portion of the essay was this: how would it be possible for predetermined and deterministic categories to change, to come into and pass out of existence? It seems like a fact of history that they do change. Foucault's account of the instability of power relations gives us a way of understanding how change is possible, how resistance is possible, how ethics is possible. Why would Foucault write a history of sexuality? Why not write a theory of the subject? Why is he interested in the care of the self, in the hypnomata of ancient Greek men? These were not diaries, after all. That's all I have for today. I'd like to suggest a few things in the way of a bibliography for the further development of Aaron's project. I would start with the third volume, Foucault's History of Sexuality, especially parts 2 and 6. The interviews and essays compiled by Rabinow are good as supplemental material. Of these, Friendship as a Way of Life, Sexual Choice, Sexual Act come to mind. In Rabinow's Foucault Reader, there's What is Enlightenment and an interview on politics and ethics. Finally, there's stuff on the genealogy of ethics in Dreyfus and Rabinow's Michel Foucault Beyond Structuralism and Hermeneutics, which also includes the very important Subject and Power afterward that I've spoken about. I would also like to recommend Deleuze's Spinoza Practical Philosophy, read along with Spinoza's Ethics as a primer for understanding freedom as a productive power of the intellect. There is a recently published nugget of solid gold by Brent Adkins at Roanoke College called True Freedom, Spinoza's Practical Philosophy, that is the second best book on Spinoza's ethics I've ever read. And finally, I'd like to suggest Leo Bersani's book, Homos, which I read as an increasingly relevant analysis of power relations and a description of one of the most promising strategies of resistance. Thank you for your participation in the first annual online undergraduate ethics conference hosted by David Kaloran and the Jackson Family Center for Ethics and Values, and we'll see you next year.